behalf of Safe Tech International, I'd like to give you all a warm welcome and thank you so much for taking time out to learn about the ECI Stop5G project. And also our heartfelt thanks to our panelists for kindly taking time from their life's work to be with us here today. Clearly, we're at a crossroads. Industry and well-lobbied governments are spiraling towards an all things digital world in the name of progress, while a growing number of people are longing to once again feel our true interconnectedness with all life. So we find ourselves stranded between these two paradigms, wishing to live a simpler, more human-scale life, while navigating the somewhat archaic institutions that still define our civilization, and all to the backdrop of global corporations foisting a tsunami of technology on us. We hope you'll find this exploration both enlightening and informative, and that it may help you discover how you personally can best serve, as we're all desperately needed now to help usher in a more vibrant and livable future. One where technology enhances, not harms. We can and we must. At the very least, we hope that you'll be inspired to sign and share the appeal with your contacts. And now I'll hand over to Rob van der Boom, our moderator, who has played an integral part in the creation of the ECI Stop5G project. So please take it from here, Rob.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to wish all of you welcome, as Amanda just did, to this webinar of Safe Tech International to promote the European Citizen Initiative Stop5G, an initiative with the objective to change the European requirements on mobile communication. An ECI is the most powerful political instrument there is for citizens to change the scene. It is more powerful than a petition, since a petition may just be ignored, and is more powerful than a lawsuit, as the rule makes the setting of any lawsuit. A successful ECI must be treated as a bill by the European Union. We want all to be protected when people want to be connected. In our view, this initiative has wide consequences, wider than the EU alone. When we have a successful ECI, it will give people, as well as authorities in other countries, a handle to change likewise. However, an ECI only becomes powerful political instrument when 1 million Europeans vote for it. All European citizens, wherever they live on the earth, may vote for this most important change. We hear all kinds of reasons not to vote for our ECI to stop the 5G developments. For some, it is too little. For others, the proposals are too much. Some just don't like the competence of the EU or fear abuse of their name by authorities. But be aware, in the EU view, every ECI is a most important sign of society and is a particular change that is needed. And if you decide not to vote, the signal is also clear. Apparently, we as citizens want 5G and 6G and the current EMF to be continued and enhanced. So if you feel a change is needed, sign during this webinar through www.signstop5g.eu and inform your friends as well to sign. We have a very strong worldwide network and a fine core of scientists and lawyers from it, and they will go deep into various issues in this webinar related to the ECI. Our presentation will take about 15 minutes for each presenter, and these 15 minutes will include time for questions. If you put your questions into the chat during the presentation, and we will go into the matter at the end of each presentation. And on top of that, at the end of the webinar, we also will have a panel discussion on the topic of today. So all in all, it will take 2 hours, and we will have a full recording and a curated vision of the same in a week or so. So take your time to be informed, have a drink and have a bite, and above all, enjoy what we are going to present to you. We will start with the presentation of Pernille Schriver. She is a biologist by training and has worked as an environmental advisor. She previously has her own training business where she taught outdoor living. More recently, she focuses on her professional life in teaching science. Pernille has been the communication coordinator of the Danish EHS Association and spent most of her time in the Stop5G movement in Denmark. This has led her to be the coordinator of the European Citizens Initiative Stop5G with the codename Stay Connected but Protected. Pernille will present the ECI Stop5G as such. Pernille, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rob. Let's see. I like that you called it our code name, Stay Connected but Protected. And thank you very much for inviting us here, Kate and all you supporters from the SafeTech International. We are very pleased. My name is Pernille Schriver, and I'm the coordinator for the ECI. And even though that I'm sitting here talking about the ECI, you have to remember that this is the work of many people. This is the work of previously 7 organization countries that represent 23 of the 27 EU countries. So we are actually a lot of countries that are supporting this ECI. And it has been a long process. The process started back in 2019 for this ECI at a Stop5G conference in Switzerland. And now we're sitting here thousands of hours later and with many, many Zoom meetings. And now we have our Stop5G ECI and it is a reality. So this is the work of many people for many hours. I will just tell a little bit about how the ECI actually works, how the EU has provided this tool. It's a democratic tool provided for the EU citizens to propose new law to the EU Commission. It's not easy. You have to dig into the legal arguments, to scientific arguments. You have to dig into the treaties of the EU. You have to find articles of the EU and pinpoint exactly where you want changes to be. So that has taken a lot of time. It has been very time consuming, but it has been fruitful as well. We have to collect 1 million signatures within a year. That is because we have to have support from 1 million EU citizens for the EU to consider these laws or these proposals that we have sent to them. And actually, if you are an EU citizen living in another country that is not an EU country, you can sign anyways. I will show you later how to do that. When we have 1 million signatures that supports our ECI, we will be invited to present the proposals for the EU Commission. And actually, we can also be enrolled in a public hearing in the Parliament. And the Parliament can actually, if they decide, to support our ECI by writing a supporting resolution. So that is a possibility as well. Afterwards, the EU Commission is required to respond to the ECI within 3 to 6 months and provide a list of actions it intends to take and a timeline for their implementation. So there is some rules and regulations for the EU Commission how to handle the proposals for the ECI when we reach 1 million signatures. I will present shortly what it is about, and you can read more about it in details on our webpage. But we actually have 3 main topics, 3 legs of the ECI. We talk about harmful to life, and that is mainly focused on the radiation part. destroying our environment, about mining and energy consumption and so on, and threatening our privacy with the data collections and big data and surveillance and so on. And most of these topics will be covered in more details by the other speakers, so I will not go into detail now, but advise all to read more about the science and data and evidence on our webpage. And then I'll show you later where to find it on our webpage. We have written 23 proposals to the EU that they have accepted for the ECI. That's not the same as they will change all the laws by now, but we have 10 proposals that is concerned about protection of all life, the wireless radiation issue, and 8 proposals about the environment, and 5 proposals about privacy and security and freedom. And the environmental part is one of the issues that is very important to talk about, because not many people know that their smartphone or the computer and so on has an environmental impact, as they actually have, with energy consumption and mining and pollution from the mining, waste products and so on. And the data part is, as I mentioned before, that millions of data points will be gathered. Data brokers will accumulate them, and they will be sold or leaked or stolen and maybe used for surveillance purposes. This is the page where you can actually sign. We have many points here that you can click, and you can go to the signing procedure. But I just want to show you what I talked about before, that you can find the more detailed information about harmful to life and environmental issues and privacy issues here. And you can go down here and find all the demands that we have for the EU. If you click here, it's this one here is about the radiation part and protection of life. Then we have the 10 proposals here. You can find them here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and down to 10. And if you go to the environmental part, you can find them here, 11 to 18, and so forth. So please, when you have time for it, go in and read about all these proposals that we have written here in details. Our goals is to spread the message of the risk of 5G and Internet of Things, because that is not what we hear from the media and authorities and politicians. So that is actually one of the main goals, to educate people about the risk of the 5G and the technology rollouts. And of course, to gather 1 million signatures, because that will give us directly access to the EU Commission, and the EU Commission have to consider our proposals. So that is very important to know that. We also are looking for more support and contacts in all EU countries. We always do that. And actually, if anybody is sitting here that are from Portugal or Luxembourg or Latvia, Lithuania, we need you. We need contact persons in these 4 countries. Also, we are always looking for more networking and sharing and supporting of all the good work that we do and others do, because that is the only way to success for us and for all of us to beat this this issue, this important issue. We cannot succeed if we don't support each other. And I sometimes see too many people quarrel internally in different networks, and that is not the way to beat the issue and make a success out of this. We have actually created an umbrella organization called Europeans for Safe Connections that we will be launching for other organizations to join in this fall. And we are actually using this name for our group behind the ECI. So when we send in feedback to EU laws and EU initiatives, we use this Europeans for Safe Connections. So when you see this umbrella organization name, that is us behind the ECI. We have actually contributed to networking between doctors and lawyers within the EU, and we'll continue to do that. And we are trying already now, before we have actually gathered 1 million signatures to influence the policy in the EU and in our own countries. As the posters you can see on the right side is actually what we do with the new initiatives from the EU, that we send feedback to the initiatives and new laws in the EU called Have You Say. So we are very busy lobbying at the moment already. And for a very important detail, where can you sign? You can go to sign stop5g.eu, and we have, you can click here, and you have to click here as well. And I just want to show you, when you have clicked once or twice on our page, you will be sent forward to this EU page where you have to go to click on which country that you actually have a citizenship in. So you can actually live in the States, but if you're a citizen of the EU countries, you can still sign. And there are actually different ways of signing. If you're from Belgium, you have to use an ID card. If you are from Denmark or Ireland, you can use your name and the street where you live and so on. So there are different ways to sign. And I'm showing you this because it's very important that you know this, that you have to give data and details about your personal life to the EU. And sometimes that is an obstacle we see for people to sign, that they don't want to sign because they have to give away their personal data. We are always talking about how to get more signatures and to get more people involved. And what you actually can do yourself is to contact the organizers. I will show you where to find organizers and contact persons from your own country on our webpage. And you can join organizations that support the ECI. You can hand out flyers, campaign materials, signatures, papers, and so on. We have a campaign button here. You can find the organizers here. And down here, you can see who is actually a contact person from your country or other countries. Please contact us. We have supporting organizations here. And then I will just tell you about the material that you can actually download here if you want to share material. So help us share. We have a lot of posters on social media. We have actually press releases and news that you can share as well. Updated info about law and science and blog articles. Yeah, we have links to Facebook, Telegram, Instagram, and so on down here. We have a news section where you can find press releases. You can translate it and send it to your own politicians, national politicians, local politicians, and so on. And a lot of material that you can share on social media or use in your own newsletters, whatever you do regarding this issue here. So I will just shorten it here and say that what we see now is the modern day of tobacco strategy regarding science, policy, and regulations. And the tobacco industry came to its knees. It did. And so will the tele industry. We have far too much evidence for this madness to continue if we work together. This is one of the posters that we have a very skilled Danish girl making. So that is one of the posters that we share on our Facebook page. So remember now, everybody, remember to sign. And thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Pernille, for your presentation of how the ECI works and how we began with it. But there is one simple question to answer. That's why people from the UK can't respond. And the problem is the UK is no longer part of the European Union. So that's why it's no possibilities for citizens from the UK to join, unfortunately. The next speaker is Klaus Buchner. He was born in 1941 in Munich, Germany. He studied physics in Munich and in Edinburgh, Scotland. He was employed by the Max Planck Institute of Physics and the Kyoto University, as well as the University of Chandigarh in India. And he was professor at the Technical University of Munich from 1973 on until his retirement. He received the Gold Medal of Merit from the University of Wrocław in Poland, and he became a political active, and he was a member of the European Parliament from 2014 until 2020. Klaus now will present how radio frequent radiation can affect us and some mechanisms and the damage of the same. So Klaus, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rob, for this kind introduction. Now, if you listen to the cell phone industry, you can always hear the same argument. The radiation, they say, of cell phones cannot be dangerous because it cannot break chemical bonds. The only way it can damage living organisms is by heating them. But we know that this is wrong. We know several ways how weak radio frequency radiation does damage us. I shall discuss here only one way because there is not so much time. Please, may I have the first slide? It shows a cell of some living organism. The blue ball denotes the membrane of the cell enclosing the interior. And outside, there are yellow dots called calcium ions, noted by Ca++. They are positively charged. And inside, in the interior, you have chlorine. That means these are negative particles. And of course, the positive particles outside and the negative particles inside attract each other. But the calcium ions cannot enter the interior because the membrane prohibits them. But there are holes in the membrane, especially adapted to calcium ions. These are called calcium channels. Usually they are closed by some complicated proteins. Please, may I have the next slide? On the left-hand part there, can you show it, please? Yes, on the left-hand part here, you see in blue, again, the membrane of the cell, and in the center, the hole, the calcium channel, and it's closed by this protein which has 4 helices. I can depict here only 2 of them. And these helices are stabilized by so-called hydrogen bridges. That's easy to understand. These proteins are very complicated structures, and the charges are not equally distributed. So sometimes you have a part of positive charge, and at some other part you have a negative charge. They attract each other, and in between is the helix, and so the helix is stabilized. Now, when you put radiation on it, the whole thing starts to vibrate. And if the vibration is so large that it breaks the hydrogen bridge, then you have no longer a stable structure. It's shown on the right part of the picture, and the calcium ions can penetrate the membrane. What does it do? There are several actions. For example, if this is a muscle cell, then the muscle will contract. If it's a nerve cell, then the nerve will give a pulse. But we are more interested in the chemical reactions, which are shown very briefly on the next slide, please. Here, I do not want to comment on all the intermediate steps via some rather complicated reactions. You have the end effect that you generate oxidative stress, and this attacks the DNA. That means the result for destroyed DNA, of course, cancer and abnormalities. Let's first look at the cancer. Can I have the next slide, please? We have many sorts, many kinds of cancer, but if we look at such specific effects, of course, we have to select the sorts of cancer which are not very frequent, so that you can easily see the influence of the radiation. And this we have with the effect of the cell phones. When you keep it near the ear, you have irradiation, strong irradiation of this part of the brain. That means it's either the temporal or the frontal lobe. If we compare the development of the cancer, very aggressive cancer in these parts of the brain, glioblastoma it's called, with how it developed since 1995 until 2014, so 20 years, then it has increased by a factor of about 3.5. This is a very bad result because this kind of cancer is almost always mutant. If you look at the other part of the brain, it's within the usual fluctuations, statistical fluctuations, not much change. That means it's not a proof, but it's a consequence, a necessary consequence of the fact that radiation does cause cancer. And it's even stronger, this indication, if you look at the results of Leonard Tardell and his group. He has shown that right-handed people who put their phone on the right-hand side, they have more cancer on the right-hand side of the brain, and left-hand people on the left-hand side. Again, this is altogether not a proof, but a necessary and very bad consequence. Now, if you look at the abnormalities, then I was part in an investigation of a pig farm with about 27,000 piglets. And we had about 20,000 without irradiation. It was very clean. We had less than 1 microwatt per square meter. And then some cell tower was built. And afterwards, the radiation was again very, very much under the present limit. It was normally several hundred microwatts per square meter, and in the extreme case, 1,200 microwatts per square meter. Can I have the next slide, please?
I think Klaus wants the next.
The frightening
slide.
fact. Sorry?
Next slide, I suppose.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes, it is. Are the abnormalities. You see here some of them in the picture. We had about 0.8% of the piglets with visible abnormalities. And with the invisible ones are not counted here. This is very frightening because pigs are biologically very similar to human beings, and we have similar effects. I cannot talk about numbers, but we have similar effects with human beings. I don't know any scientific research on it, but it's urgent to do it. It's not only restricted, of course, to piglets. It's, if you look at the next slide, we have some calves. And, well, there's no scientific paper on it. It's just photos of the farmer. This, as yet, were very bad news. The good news are that this radiation is really not necessary for our cell phones and the base stations. There are a lot of changes which can be done immediately now if we force industry to do so. The first and perhaps the most important is to stop the communication of the cell phones inside a building with the cell towers outside. You need to know that the concrete walls, about 16 centimeters thick, absorb up to 99.9% of the radiation. That means only 1/1000th of the radiations go through. Or in other words, you need to increase the radiation of the cell towers and of the cell phones by a factor of thousands, just because you want to have this communication. You can easily avoid it. It's not so well done with Wi-Fi. You can use light communications, visible light, infrared. You can use repeaters. There are some technical ways to do it. But it will be done only if we force industry to do it, because it costs more, and so they want to avoid it. Let's stay together. Perhaps with our ECI, we can achieve this. Please do it. It's our health. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Klaus, for your presentation on the impact of EMF on living cells, and as a consequence, cancer, in the case of piglets and calves, deformations at birth, and that we have technical options for alternatives. There is some time for questions, but so far I've not really seen a question about this presentation. And I think it's also very clear what was presented. So we'll go to the next speaker. And the next speaker is Lorna Hackett. She's a civil rights lawyer and the co-founder of Hackett & Debs LLP. She is the litigator of the Action Against 5G judicial review in England, on which the Court of Appeal in London recently granted permission to proceed to a full hearing in the administrative court. Ms. Hackett is dedicated to equality, fairness, and justice, and representing the most vulnerable in society, and is a renowned public speaker in social justice and criminal justice reform. Lorna Hackett will provide us with an overview of the 5G case in England, and will also discuss the impact of EHS. Lorna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rob, for the introduction, and I'm really grateful to be here today to talk about this subject. Particularly, also, I want to thank everybody who has put together this initiative and organised today's event, because it is such a detailed and considered European citizens initiative. And for the reasons that I'm going to talk to you about, I don't think there is anything more important right now than signing this petition to enable European citizens to have their say for law reform. Briefly, I'm going to talk to you about the 5G judicial review in England and the grounds on which permission has been granted. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience of being the litigator on the 5G case. And finally, just the importance of the initiative that we're all here to talk about today. Now, in England and in other jurisdictions, judicial review is a means by which you can challenge the decisions or omissions of public bodies. So you can basically, on certain limited grounds, you can go to the High Court and ask for a public body to explain itself. In this case, we brought a challenge on human rights grounds, in that we said that the government's actions and omissions were failing to take into account fundamental protections and human rights freedoms. And we asked the court to decide whether or not the authorities in England were actually discharging their obligations in a lawful matter. The case went to the administrative court, and then on appeal to the administrative court, there was an oral hearing, following which it went to the Court of Appeal. And I'm pleased to confirm, as Rob said in the introduction, that permission was granted to proceed to a full hearing in the Administrative Court in London. And it was on these grounds. I'm just going to read them. the failure to provide adequate or effective information to the public about the risks and how, if it be possible, it might be possible for individuals to avoid or minimize the risks. Secondly, the failure to provide adequate and sufficient reasons for not establishing a process to investigate and establish the adverse health effects and the risks of adverse health effects from 5G technology, and for discounting the risks presented by the evidence available. And finally, the failure to meet the requirements of transparency and openness required of a public body. Now, these are significant breaches of the Human Rights Act, and that is the grounds on which this case is advanced. We now await directions and a date for a full hearing in London. There are many thousands of peer-reviewed scientific studies and reports that detail the risks, the biological effects of RFR, which Klaus has highlighted to you in the previous presentation. But unfortunately, I am living proof that this can harm people. It has, in the course of the case that I prepared on behalf of my clients, I became injured by radio frequency radiation, and it has changed my life. This was nearly 2 years ago now, but in September 2020, I and my assistant went to visit a lady who was saying that the radiation outside her home in London was extremely bad and was making her feel very ill. My assistant and I went to take a witness statement from this lady, and we spent 2.5 hours sitting in her garden taking that witness statement. Neither of us has been the same ever since. We came away with radiation burns, and to different extents, we were very badly affected over a period of time. It has been a monumental change to my life in that I now have to consider where I'm going to go, how many people are going to be there, is there going to be Wi-Fi, am I going to feel unwell? This didn't happen before I went to that lady's house. I had an acute full body exposure to radio frequency radiation, and it has subsequently made me sensitive. Am I going to be ill forever? I don't know. But what I can tell you is that I became so sensitive that I could feel that I was going to be seeing a mobile phone mast soon, because I could feel it before I saw it. That's not a great superpower. It's sensitivity, which I never wanted and I didn't consent to. Now, I think we'll all agree technology is wonderful. It's brought so many benefits to our lives. During the pandemic, it has enabled us to keep in contact with people that we weren't able to see, our loved ones, people all over the world. And initiatives like this wouldn't be possible without technology, but it's safe technology. We don't need to be irradiated in order to communicate effectively. We just don't. Now, you might feel watching this that you might feel skeptical about what I'm saying. You might think, well, she probably was a bit ill before, or it was probably she's, imagined that this is the case and that this has happened to her, or you might just not believe me. Either way, it doesn't really matter. The point is, you probably think if something's dangerous, if something's going to harm you, then surely the governments would be doing something about this. I'd know about it. I'd be able to protect my family. Surely that would be the case. Well, I get it, but the risks are real. It's fundamentally uncomfortable to consider the prospect that this is happening to all of us right now, regardless of nationality, race, ethnicity, political persuasion, or where we are in the world. But it is. And there's something now that we can all do about it. When people unite for a common purpose, amazing things can happen. Against all odds, laws can change, and together we can make a change. We can have safe technology without the risks to us, to our beautiful planet, to our family, to our friends, and to future generations, our children, the oceans, everything. This is going to be all pervasive everywhere unless we do something about it, and you can. And you can do that by signing the European Citizens Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lorna, for your presentation. about the case in London and your affection to EHS and the need for safe technology, and whether we can trust authorities to do the right thing, and that we have to unite to change the technology to a safe technology. And indeed, we feel that technology is rather important in our lives, but it should be safe. And maybe there will be some questions coming up for you as well, Lorna.
Actually, there are a couple. Lorna,
Yeah.
when you were exposed, how far away do you think the mast was from you?
Well, there were five. There were 5 masts, all within about. I can see the map, but I couldn't measure them. But they were in pretty close proximity, and we were right next to an arterial road in central London. So there was there were lots of masts around this lady's house, and a lot of traffic as well.
Thank you. And would it be possible for you to provide a link to the case that is being presented right now? And you can...
Sure, I could. Yes, I can give you a link to my client's website if that's helpful, because that has a lot of information on it.
Great, thank you.
So the next speaker will be Ole Johansson, and he is a world leading authority in the field of EMF radiation and health effects. His many scientific studies have been widely recognized in the public media, both nationally as well as internationally. And he's a regular interviewed guest in various media. He has also been a guest professor as well as an adjunct professor in basic and clinical neuroscience in the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. Ole Johansson will speak now about EMF effects on cells, organisms, bacteria, etc. And we will go into the question, what can we learn from pollinators, bacteria, plants, and sperm, and immune protective cells about adverse biological or effects of artificial EMF? Ole, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rob, for that introduction. Dear viewer or listener, what I want from you at first is that you sign the European Citizens Initiative, and after doing it, share the link as widely as you ever can, not primarily for yourself and your loved ones, but for your bacteria, for all the plants, for insects and other pollinators, and for other animals. They don't have access to these links, so they need your immediate help. They need your finger on the sign button. As you heard, I'm a retired neuroscientist from the Karolinska Institute, and I also worked at the Royal Institute of Technology, both in Stockholm, Sweden. Since 1977, I have been interested in the topic of adverse health and biological effects of artificial electromagnetic fields, such as from cell phone systems, Wi-Fi, tablets, laptops, high-frequency light bulbs, wireless smart meters, baby alarms, DECT phones, power lines, and much more. And as Amanda Kenton said in her brilliant introduction, we are showered with a tsunami of new technologies and gadgets based on wireless protocols. They are sold to us as safe, but independent science says very differently. I am very proud to have been asked to support Pernille Schreiber, Kate Kill, Rob van der Boom, Ben Levy, and all their associates with today's webinar, and I thank you all for taking time to listen to me. It is in itself a tremendous honor. I am not a believer. I don't believe the earth is flat or that Elvis Presley still is alive and kicking. No, I only use verified facts from scientifically controlled studies, replicated and controlled again when they are available, or classical scientific consensus models when the facts may be scarce or lacking altogether. I truly respect religious believers, but not people basing their scientific opinions on wild speculations. The very famous Charles Darwin rightfully said, and I quote, to kill an error is as good a service as, and sometimes even better than, the establishing of a new truth or fact. On November 10, 1942, after the victorious second battle at El Alamein in North Africa, Winston Churchill said, "Now this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning." It is the same with the European Citizens Initiative. It is not the final word on the topic. A lot more needs to be covered, like all the other versions of cell phone telecommunication, all other forms of man-made electromagnetic fields, wireless smart meters, baby alarms, wireless internet, extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields from power lines and indoor gadgets, FM radio, radar, and many, many more. Also, much more needs to be said about persons with a functional impairment, electrohypersensitivity, and their special needs. As you all know, and I quote the United Nations, they are entitled to live an equal life in a society based on equality. However, we are far, far from it, especially in our modern societies, so a lot more needs to be done. And what about the needs of the female egg cells and the male sperm cells, the fetus, the newly born, of the child, the ill, the elderly, etc.? Much more needs to be addressed, and we are all very well aware of that. But for the time being, the European Citizens Initiative is a very competent approach to start this process, and I congratulate Pernille and all her mates to a very well done lining up. Personally, I am particularly concerned about the ongoing impacts on truly innocent and naive organisms, including bacteria turning antibiotic resistant due to wireless radiation from Wi-Fi or the second generation mobile telephony, plants being damaged, insects moving away from hotspots of exposure, honeybees producing less good and less rich honey, and other animals demonstrating worrying reactions. They have not asked for being whole body irradiated 24/7 wherever they reside, orient, migrate, forage, reproduce, mate, nest and den build, engage in territorial maintenance, defense and longevity and survivorship. In addition to these concerns, already have scary cytotoxic and genotoxic effects of the artificial electromagnetic fields been observed, which deepens my concerns. Plants, bacteria, and animals are not being protected from this damage, as there are no standards pertaining to wildlife, livestock, or pets, and no worldwide police forces actively protecting them on an everyday basis. Very recently, an unusually high honeybee die-off has been reported from Canada by June the 2nd this year. Over this past winter, beekeepers across the province of Ontario are reporting major losses up to 90% of their colonies, according to the Ontario Beekeepers Association. Before this, all around the world, dramatic reductions in pollinating insect populations have been noted. For instance, in Germany in 2017, where more than 75% of them were reported gone. And in 2021, the last year, the media reported of a more than 90% reduction of the bumblebee populations in the United States of America. Many beekeepers can also witness similar decreases in honeybee populations, as well as in other insect groups, and so can the ordinary citizens. In laboratory-type experiments, it has in addition been revealed that the insects do not like cell phone radiation. I, and together with my co-workers, we are trying to pursue investigations and experiments, but we lack the proper resources. But we are continuously trying to get hold of it. Well, against this background, it may be impossible to stay wirelessly connected, but protected. We must realize we need to set off in a completely other direction, as outlined many times over the last decades, and including taking steps backwards, such as leaving the whole wireless agenda and instead use shielded wide solutions for communications, such as fiber optics. The very famous Swedish young girl, Greta Thunberg, have excoriated global leaders over their premises to address the climate emergency, dismissing them as blah, blah, blahs. Thunberg, who recently inspired the Global Fridays for Future movement, said that hopes and dreams drown in empty words and promises, and that's where 30 years of blah, blah, blah have led us. And I have nearly 50 years of the same blah, blah, blah. Now I ask the same when it comes to adverse health and biological effects of artificial electromagnetic fields from all our gadgets, installations, and toys. Where is the reaction? Where is the precautionary principle resulting in real action? I'm afraid that future generations of bacteria and insects will cite me when I, in the year 2022, say that, and I quote, curiosity may have killed the cat, but for sure, stupidity killed off mankind. I rather see that humans in the future can look back and say, wow, those suckers in 2022 nearly ended life on this planet. But mankind as a whole did react in due time. They did listen to the concerned voices, such as the European Citizens Initiative. They did take action. They did understand. We must realize we are not the crown of creation, but just members of a real worldwide web of life. It is time we step up and show us worthy of that membership. Greed must be turned into need, and not only human need, but the needs of every species on our planet we call Earth. So please sign. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ola, for your presentation and your question to sign the ECI, because there really is a need for change and a new direction before nature will be basically killed. So then we carry on to Christian. He's also present today. Christian Jensen is a Danish attorney. Before he graduated in 2008, he has worked extensively in the vast field of fundamental human rights, including the environment, pollution, and the right to live and respect for one's home and privacy. The torture case against the state and the Danish military, free speech, religious freedom in a democratic society, non-discrimination, etc., etc. With this expertise, he will speak about the human rights and wireless communication. Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rob. And I hope everyone can hear me now, and that the slides have been received by Ben. I apologize for sending them late, and thank you to everyone for inviting me to say something at this particular instance. I was asked to say a few words on the basics of the human rights and environmental law issues which are connected to the European ECI initiative, which is to say which rules underpin the initiative's points on why it is necessary and right to ask the EU to adopt rules protecting us against electromagnetic frequency radiation. So that's the topic of this discussion, and it is based on two legs. First is the human rights and RF EMF pollutions, which is the first point of this brief introduction I'm going to give you to this. You can find the same information in the legal opinion, which was published also in English in 2019, which is available on the Danish EHS Association's website. Regarding human rights and RF EMF pollutions, there are two key conventions. The European Convention on Human Rights, which is acceded to by every European state, including in the wider sense of what constitutes Europe. And then there's a single article in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which I will also get into. Two key articles in the ECHR. The first is Article 2 on the right to life, and Article 8 regards the right to respect for private and family life, which is in brief usually referred to as the right to privacy and the right for respect for one's home. Now, on the next slide, you will be able to see that Article 2 on the right to life is much more than simply a right not to be killed off by government authorities at random circumstance. The case law on this very, very briefly worded article emanates from the European Court of Human Rights, which makes judgments on the interpretation of the European Convention of Human Rights. This is not to be confused with the EU Court of Law, by the way. I would like to stress that point because those two judiciaries are often mixed up. It's very important to keep them as separate. But the case law from the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights, which interprets the convention, are binding upon all member states who are parties to the convention. And some of the key points relating to the right to life and in relation to RFEMF are the following. First and foremost, it also applies to pollution emanating from private corporations. This is not something isolated to pollution done by state-owned businesses, for instance, or state-owned facilities, such as waste facilities, for instance. It also applies to private corporations, such as telecommunications corporations, etc. And one of the key points is that foreseeable deaths, which could have been avoided, can entail state responsibility. And it also applies to mortal danger not resulting in death, and it applies to illness which develops over time, not only to sudden events such as catastrophic instances. The point in this relation is particularly related to, for instance, cancer cases, as it can obviously be fatal to suffer from cancer in the wrong places of your body, and radiofrequent electromagnetic radiation can cause cancer illnesses according to what the scientific status is. So it's a very important point to remember in this sense. Now, the state also has a duty of care and oversight towards dangerous polluting enterprise. The state must set up legal and administrative frameworks designed to pose an effective deterrent against danger to life. This is most usually seen in guidelines that are similar to what IGNIRP purports to do, which is to set up rules and regulations which say that you must stay within these limits of pollution, for instance, in order to conduct your business. So the key point in relation to IGNIRP, and quicker rather than later, it expires on March 1st, 2023, but it would definitely be relevant to see as many signatures as possible, as early as possible. So do please make your voices heard and participate in what resembles European democracy, at least in this sense. Now, regarding EU as a body, it has adopted a Charter of Fundamental Rights, which has a corresponding right in its Article 2 as the Article 2 of the European Convention on Human Rights. This is relevant because it is binding on all EU institutions and on member states when they apply or enforce EU law. And therefore, it is also relevant to refer to these articles and the Article 2 of the ECHR in this connection. What is important also to remember about the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights is that as it relates to Article 2, its purpose to be interpreted in line with the European Convention on Human Rights. So any case law which emanates from the European Court of Human Rights on Article 2 is potentially relevant to the EU institutions. The Article 8 revolves around the right to respect for private and family life, also briefly referred to as respect for the home, usually. Now, serious environmental pollution can affect the well-being of individuals and prevent them from enjoying their private and family life. It also applies to the home, for instance, in relation to radiation pollution, the so-called smart meters, which are the digitally read meters gauging our consumption of electricity and potentially also other sources of energy. And this is something which in several countries is mandated as something you have to install in the home, its source being also in itself an EU directive, which does not obligate any state to install a smart meter which is wireless, which is a key point in some of the cases revolving around this issue. If the state does not act to avoid so-called serious environmental pollution, and that is of course a question of evidence, even though it is capable of doing so, there is actually at the outset, according to the EGHR case law, a responsibility to be met by the responding state. Cases which have already been dealt with by the European Court of Human Rights revolve typically around pollution from noise pollution from airports, pollution of the clean air as it relates to waste sites, waste facilities in Italy, and so forth. Now, there is classic back and forth as it relates to responsibility and knowledge in this particular issue, and that is that ICNIRP is often referred to by states as the ones who lay down the guidelines, the rules regarding this issue. And the states basically between the lines insinuate that, well, since ICNIRP says this, then we as a government, of course, have no responsibility or knowledge above that. However, it is important to remember ICNIRP does not lay down binding rules. It does not have any such authority. It is the sole responsibility of the EU member states to adopt relevant and sufficient and effective guidelines protecting people from Article 2 and Article 8 breaches from, for instance, radio frequency poisoning or pollution. It is not something which can be laid at the door of ICNIRP. It is the sole responsibility of the member states. On this issue, however, since we see in most, if not all, European countries that ICNIRP is used as the blanket excuse for maintaining a dogma revolving only around the body as a source of possible harm to one's health as it relates to radio frequent pollution, there will very soon in Denmark be filed a complaint regarding ICNIRP's non-independence of primarily the telecommunications industry, which is another important aspect of this whole issue, since states will attempt to renounce responsibility by referring to the ICNIRP guidelines, saying that we follow those, and then we're in the clear. This is not an operable excuse if we can show that ICNIRP is indeed not independent of, for instance, the telecommunications industry or other interested parties. So this is what some of the next steps that will be taken in Denmark nationally. The EU Charter of Fundamental Rights has a corresponding right to Article 8 of the European Convention in the Charter's Article 7. So with that, I will quickly go through the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. We can see that in Article 24 of the first paragraph, first sentence, it is simply stated that state parties do recognize the right of the child to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health. And I underlined it here. It is not underlined in the original text. The point being, as it refers to the other issues I've been through and what the other speakers have said so clearly, is that we do not obtain the highest attainable standard of health if we provide no protection for children being subjected to radio frequent radiation poisoning. This should be quite obvious. And as regards rights of children, it is unfortunately noteworthy, as I'm sure for the scientists among us tonight will be able to confirm, that children are seen to be particularly susceptible to radiation effects, unfortunately, as they are not fully developed bodily. This leads me to the environmental portion of the very, very brief and quick introduction to the legal rights revolving around radio frequent electromagnetic radiation. On the next slide, I have noted the two central EU Council directives relating to this issue. There are other rules, but these are what I think are the most central ones as it relates to the ECI and the European Union regulations. The first one, as we can see on the next slide, I've just noted briefly, is the Council directive on the conservation of wild birds. It says in Article 4, Paragraph 1 of this Council Directive that the states are obligated to ensure protected species survival and reproduction in their area of distribution. This is particularly relevant as it relates to the erection of masts, telemasts all over the countryside usually, as these kinds of masts will emanate radiation which is more harmful to birds than to humans if not addressed properly, and IGNIAP does not address effects on wildlife, for instance, then these obligations in this directive will not be met as long as none of these effects are even considered by the administrative body providing usually a permit for the construction of the mast and the operation of the mast. So that is another legal issue which is relevant to also the ECI and why the ECI is very important. In the same article in paragraph 4, it says that member states shall take, which means it is not voluntary, it is an obligation, to avoid pollution or deterioration of habitats or any disturbances affecting the birds insofar as these would be significant. So we're not talking about small disturbances, we're talking about significant disturbances as it relates to the habitats of birds. In this connection, these EU member states are obligated to take appropriate steps, which again is an active obligation, it is a positive obligation to actually avoid the pollution or deterioration of these habitats. Something which is very central to the environmental law issues revolving around RFEMF, and something which perhaps is not given the amount of attention it deserves. The next slide relates to the Habitat Directive, as it is usually called, from 1992, the European Union Council Directive on the conservation of natural habitats and of wild flora and fauna. This is, in this connection, it is more or less equivalent to the Wild Bird Conservation Directive, which I was just mentioning, in that the Habitat Directive provides, at least on paper, it provides a similar protection and duty of protection to avoid pollution and destruction of natural habitats and that of the wild flora and fauna mentioned in the appendixes to the Council Directive. These areas are generally known as the Natura 2000 network, which is meant to ensure the natural habitats of protected species are maintained or, where appropriate, even restored. And Article 6, Paragraph 2 to 4, a well-known article in that particular directive as it relates to planning and project permits, which is something we see regularly pop up in administrative proceedings. The obligation, according to this article, basically states that when a government or when an administrative authority, for instance, a local municipality, does consider providing a permit for a plan or a project for instance, a mast, then EU member states are obligated to ensure they do no damage to the integrity of the locale. I consider it to be a very important national planning rule, and it is enforced in all EU member states. However, I also see that the authorities often try to ignore these kinds of rules, saying that, well, IGNIAP says that there is no danger and we do not think that we need to do anything else. But please remember what I said just a minute ago. IGNIAP does not pronounce itself on the effect these radiation projects have on wildlife. IGNIAP pronounces itself on the effects, according to them, on humans only. So do not be fooled by this kind of argument if you do take this up to at the local level. However, I would say, as it relates to the ECI, it is extremely important for the ECI to succeed, as this is another way of trying to force member states' hands to respect what is the scientific status quo.
Thank you very much, Christian, for your explanation of the human rights and how it is internationally and at the EU level, and the proposals how we could use these rules and regulations to support our case. Thank you to Christian for the presentation. We go to Julian Grasher is an international attorney professional negotiator, inventor, and recognized expert in East Asia, chairman and president of the Broadband International Legal Action Network, and founder and CEO of the Big Heart Technologies. And in his presentation, Julian will introduce an innovative approach to wireless communication. He feels technology and law is not sufficient. We need also to focus at care, wisdom, beauty, and kindness for local controlled fiber connections. A completely different approach than what Christian and Lorna had, also from the legal point of view. Julian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rob. I'm involved in a wide range of cases, pausing the blanket approval of satellites, litigation against the US federal government, the FCC, FDA, HHS, encouraging great safe workplaces, ensuring due process and protection of property being taken away at present by the local governments, and the safeguarding of international treasures, such as Lake Tahoe. I think all of us share a goal today to encourage and empower the people and their communities around the world to take an individual and collective action on this ECI, that is to endorse these 23 proposals prepared by groups in 27 countries. In other words, 1 million signatures by the spring of 2023, 9 months. Today, I will make 3 fundamental points in the time allotted. First, there's a striking complementarity of an immediately available technology that effectively addresses all the concerns reflected in the 23 proposals. And I speak of optical fiber to the premises and to the workplace. A priority of optical fiber first is now the stated policy of the NTIA, that's the National Telecommunications Infrastructure Agency in the US. It's an agency of the Department of Commerce that advises the president. Optical fiber will itself be an attractor of other innovative technologies such as intelligent solar microgrids, of which Siemens is already a world leader. Second, technology without a soul, in other words, without an underpinning of core values, as is said in 1 Corinthians, a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. Third, a powerful, immediate, and practical way to accomplish our goal of 1 million signatures is to focus our advocacy on a vote on core values, accomplishing unconditional goals that we can immediately advance in our cause. So I will describe that and the basis for it, and then elaborate a little bit on what I call the power of 10. I suggest that an appeal to the striking deep differences, as these are actually embodied in action and values, between those who are actively promoting wireless, heedless of their consequences, and the values underlying the 23 proposals can be a powerful agent of engagement. So first, briefly, the challenge. We face a technological juggernaut of enormity that the world has never seen before. Over the next few years, the entire Earth, the heavens, and the oceans will become part of a wireless mesh controlled by a strikingly few remote actors within a few companies, captive government agencies, and the military. If successful, the juggernaut would cause untold human misery to humans and the environment from RF EMF radiation. It will enable governments and corporations to surveil and intrude further on our private lives and dramatically increase the chances of global conflict, especially between the West, Russia, and China. It is happening before our very eyes and will largely be irreversible unless we collectively act now. The present gathering is an exception, of course, to what I'm describing. A large part of the population is uninformed or feeling defeated and helpless. Now, here's the good news. Optical fiber first, in a single stroke, solves most of the problems we're concerned about. First, it brings local ownership, control, management, and financing to telecommunications infrastructure. Second, it is safe, secure, fast, private, resilient, energy efficient, and climate change friendly, the very issues that Lorna and Christian talked about. Optical fiber itself will be a catalyst for other innovative technologies, which I mentioned, intelligent solar microgrids, of which Siemens is already a world leader. Every one of the 23 proposals would be advanced by the introduction of optical fiber infrastructure, which already is an important priority of some European governments. These physical local communities of light based on optical fiber set a not important and unique context for the discussion I want to turn to now of values. Historically, change comes from a shift in values. As described in my book, Environmental Law in Japan, after the war, Japanese society was praised cities of smoke, they called it Kemuri no Miyako, as emblems of Japan's phoenix-like recovery from World War II. But then the injuries appeared in Minamata and other parts of Japan. A citizens' group, a grassroots movement developed that advanced human dignity and rights and the suffering of the people. After many years, the courts heard these anguished pleas and developed some important innovations that squared with the Japanese Civil Code, Section 709, which is actually based on the German Civil Code, to recognize not only individual compensation, but actually collective responsibilities, citing the OECD's 1972 polluter pays principle. As I described, this model, based on the Dutch model originally, mixed compensation to the victims with prevention of the harms. At its core, however, it was driven by a transformation of values. It is useful to understand the challenge from the perspective of sharply different values of the wireless industry and the supporting captive agencies, at least judging by their policies and other actions. These values stress top-down, centralized control under the guise of national security and an economic model that gives priority to private shareholder values. As Nobel laureate Milton Friedman is often quoted, the primary goal of all this corporate activity is to put profits in the pockets of the shareholders. Now, the striking thing is that in their personal lives, I am perfectly willing to concede that many of these actors embrace the very values that we're all talking about. And indeed, even more curious, these companies are advocating and justifying their actions by the values that we espouse. For example, we're involved in a negotiation now with one of the top semiconductor industries, who out of the mouth of the CEO is the most important priority of this company is workplace safety. And our client, along with many others, have been grievously injured, irreparably harmed, because these fabs in the semiconductor company have all been converted to wireless. In Los Angeles today, the driving justification of the wireless purveyors is for the unconstitutional taking of property. In Los Angeles, you can erect a tower without giving anybody's notice. You can assign an address to that tower, claiming it's your own, and take private property without compensation, all to justify closing the digital divide. So nothing could be farther than the truth, but there is a cynical use of values to justify these actions. So now turning to the proposals, we can see that there are core values that underpin all of them. For example, Proposal 1, standards should consider only thermal effects. Underpinning this is a value of reverence for life, as Ali says, a sacred web of life, that we must, as part of this fiduciary duty, inform ourselves of the biological and environmental effects. There is an underpinning interest in the value of truth, to find out the facts, and then underpinning that, the burden of proof. There is a sense of people come first before corporate shareholder value, and this affects who has to prove what, when there is ample evidence of a causal relationship of exposure to harm. Now, of course, science is uncertain. All of science, we want science to be uncertain. The deep question is who pays for the uncertainty? And the way the system is now being rigged is that the public pays principle, not the polluter pays principle, is at play. For example, another value in Proposal 2, the importance of process. Process itself is a value. The US courts in August 13th, 2021, recognized in the case of CHD versus FCC that a government agency cannot just simply issue ukases, conclusions. It has to justify its actions. There must be a record by which a reviewing court and the public can understand that. Proposal 4 refers to conflicts of interest. Of course, this is an underpinning value, and what we are really saying is there has to be a viable alternative to ICNIRP, because ICNIRP is under a clear conflict of interest. The underlying value is that science should not be politicized or manipulated. There ought to be an independent inquiry to what is actually happening. Another value in Proposal 6 is the protection, as Christian has mentioned, of vulnerable populations, children, disabled, the elderly, pregnant women. The law in many of these areas in Europe and the United States is actually on the right track. It enshrines and protects these values. The point is that they're being grossly ignored. In the United States, I often use the phrase that these agencies see themselves as supra-constitutional. They no longer have to abide by the law that's actually on the books. Since 1968, we've had a Radiation Control Health Safety Act that recognizes the exposure of the public to RF emitted radiation, it creates an imminent hazard. And yet this law has been, which is not repealed, is right in the books, but it is being every day ignored. There is an underlying value of frugality, of conservation that underpins these proposals, which it needs to be recognized explicitly. So I could go through in great length each one of these proposals and identify the important values that underpin it that are being systematically disregarded. But I won't do that since of the limitations of time. I just really want to conclude as a professional negotiator with how this idea of values can be a strategic driver of action. Our goal, again, is to accomplish within 9 months signature of 1 million people to these 23 proposals. Now, why will people do that? I'm suggesting a very powerful point of leverage is to come meet people at the point where they really yearn for. I think most people today yearn for a more peaceful world, a world that's based on caring, based on courage, resilience, and love. Let's give them the understanding that the people who we are seeking to sign these proposals actually have a choice. They have a choice to take an action over which they have 100% control. My dear friend Ben Levi refers to this as an unconditional goal. If they want to turn the tiller for good, they need to do only one thing: sign these proposals. And there's one other thing they can do. They can enlist 10 other signatures. I call this the power of 10. So, and the core as to what will motivate people to sign, I believe, is to starkly show the choice between values that seek to optimize corporate shareholder value and profits versus values that recognize creating shared community value, communities of life that not only work with technology, but take technology and point to its highest and best uses. You could call it the Buddha nature of technologies, coupling these to values which even the telecoms cynically are using to justify their actions. This is how we can accomplish our purpose within the next few months. Now, the final observation I want to make is that despair and hopelessness is an artifact of mind. We have far more dominion over our destinies than we are being conditioned to suppose. We have 9 months. 9 months is a small time, but in this small, most greatly lived. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julian, for this most interesting approach. not only from the legal point of view, but also from the values on which we actually barely exist. I think we have a number of questions that I didn't see because I didn't see it at the proper place, or I didn't look at the proper place.
These are for the panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can go on to the movie if you want.
Yeah, and we can handle them then at the end of and at the panel, I mean. Because also the production of the questions itself takes some time. So we go to Guillaume Pitron. He is a well-known French journalist and documentary maker. He focuses his work on commodities and on the economic, political, and environmental issues associated with there. He has authored around 100 reports, investigations, and documentaries. And in 2021, he published his last book, Digital Hell: Trip to the End of Alike. He holds a postgraduate law degree and a master's in international law. We will have a recorded talk of Guillaume Pitron, which offers a very balanced and candid look at the humanity's e-footprint from our ever more digitalized world. As you will hear, he details the minerals, the rare earth metals needed in our devices, such as cell phones, tablets, etc. What we need to consider in addition is that our current technology trajectory envisions for the near future correcting far more than cell phones, tablets, and such. The idea is to connect everything, place and events, to the internet, from our outer space to the deep depths of the ocean. This will also include the near endless list of things, including body implants and connective processes, which are hugely data consumptive, and likely many other largely unnecessary applications. So we'll now see the recording Guillaume Pitron made for us.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. Thank you to Kate Kiel for thinking about me. My name is Guillaume Pitron. I am a French journalist. I am a documentary maker and an author of investigative books. I'm based in Paris, in France, where I'm speaking to you now. And I am the author of a book which was published in the United States in 2020 by Scribe Publication. And this book is entitled The Rare Metals War, The Dark Side of the Energy Transition and Digitalization. The subject of this book is to talk about the metals which make the digital technologies possible. Nothing is virtual, everything is material. And this is what I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about the material impact of digital technologies. I want to talk to you about the environmental impact of these technologies, which is a subject which is too often neglected, yet it is a very, very important subject. As you know, when we speak about digital technologies, we often speak about the cloud. We speak about virtual technologies. We speak about dematerialization. And these words are very ambiguous because they really literally let us think that when we turn virtual, when we do online something that we don't in the physical world, it's just going to have no impact, and we're going to have environmentally friendly actions. Let's assume that I send an email. It's always obviously much better for the environment to send an email than to send a mail. It's going to cost less for the environment. That's very true. But the ambiguity is to let us think that it has zero impact, and this is very false. There is a greenwashing here, obviously. Digital technologies have an impact for sure, and this impact has been studied for many years notably in the United States, but also in Europe, in Germany, in Sweden. And I have in mind a study that was published in 2019 by a French think tank whose name is the Shift Project. And the Shift Project comes to the conclusion that digital technologies, as they are being deployed today, harm more the environment than they protect it. So you see there are two narratives that are contradictory. On one hand, a narrative which is being pushed forward by the telecommunications industry, saying that internet is good for the environment. And on the other hand, a narrative which is being advocated by usually NGOs, which tells the contrary. And it's very hard to tell the truth. It's very hard to figure out precisely the real cost and the real impact on internet, on digital technologies and the environment, and to strike a final balance. What I know for sure is that we are turning more and more virtual. COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated our consumption of digital devices to have a social life on Zoom and to buy products online. And today, this industry, digital industry, is having a more and more impact on the environment. It's growing by 8 to 6% per year, this environmental impact. This is the fastest growing environmental impact now today. And this issue of digital pollution is set to become one of the most important environmental issues of the next decades, that is for sure. Why is that? Because first, technologies, digital technologies and 5G is about material, it's about commodities, it's about resource, it's about metals. You would do nothing without a wealth of metals and minerals which are necessary to manufacture the billions of interfaces, tablets, phones, screens, which are available today on the markets. You would do no 5G without the recourse to these metals. Just think about it. A phone, as an iPhone, has 60, 70 minerals featured in the phone itself, whether it's silver, rare earths, which is a family of specific metals, copper, gallium, indium. Many metals are necessary today to make our interfaces, to manufacture these interfaces. Just to give you some macroeconomic figures, digital technologies consume 23% of the world production of silver, 12% of the world production of copper, 7% of the world production of aluminium, 40% of the world production of tantalum, 15% of the world production of palladium, just to name a few. But that gives you an idea of how important the need for metal is when it comes to manufacturing dematerialized technologies. So as you can see, there is no such thing as dematerialized technologies. And for each of these metals, there is a need for extraction and refining of the metals. And as a journalist, as a reporter, as an on-the-field journalist, I've been for the last years on the field, especially in China, to witness with my own eyes the extraction of graphite, which is a mineral which is necessary for manufacturing the batteries of your phones, and also the rare earths, which is necessary for making the magnets of your phone, the magnet which makes your phone vibrate, and the rare earths are being extracted and refined also in China. And I've seen these processes, and I could speak for hours about it and I have no time, but I can tell you how polluting it is to extract and refine these metals. And we can multiply examples by the number of metals which are being featured in our digital technologies. We often have no idea about that. We have no idea about the mining pollution that makes our devices, our electronic devices come alive. Why is that? Well, it's because the mines are not in our countries, are not in Western countries. France, European Union, and the United States have very few mines. we used in the Western world to have mines, but we progressively closed the mines and closed the refineries because we didn't want to have the pollution associated with these processes. Back in the 80s, the United States, France, Australia were extracting and processing rare earths which are metals necessary for our phone, as I said before. But because of the pollution generated by these resources, by the production of these resources, notably in California, well, the mining process, the refining process were closed and they were sent to China. China has a lot of mines today, have lots of resources and open mines, considering in the 80s that environmental issues were not a problem for China and that they could pollute their soil, but that was not such a problem as long as they could get richer and catch up their economic delay to the West by developing their mineral industry. So we have outsourced the mines, we have outsourced the pollution of such metals, the pollution of digital technologies to poor countries, whether it's DRC, South America, Democratic Republic of Congo, South America, and also China, to name a few, so that the pollution has become invisible and so hard, that is why it's so hard to understand that these digital technologies are polluting. Our need for metals is exploding. We need more and more of them in order to accelerate the energy transition. Don't forget that the energy transition for making electric vehicles, wind turbines, solar panels needs metals, and to make also the digital transition possible. A French study which has been published a couple of years ago by the University of Grenoble in the south of France, this study tells us that in the next 30 years, the humanity will extract and consume more metals and minerals than all the metals and minerals that have been extracted and consumed for the last 70,000 years. We need metals and minerals for many various economic sectors, but the energy transition and the digital transition accelerate this need for metals, this material impact of our lives. And the contrary, thinking the contrary would be obviously false. So this is the reason why we wonder where we could extract these products today, not only in Western world countries, but also in developing countries. The United States is thinking about reopening mines. Europe too is thinking about reopening mines to have its own, to produce its own strategic resources. Some discussions are being held at the international level to extract metals from polymetallic nodules, which are being found in the depth of the oceans, notably in the Pacific. So we should make a link between our phones, our digital technologies, 5G devices, and the depths of the oceans, which are rich of these metals. And this is a real question which will arise in the future years. That being said, I want to insist upon the fact that 5G technologies are coming in the debate, and 5G technologies are being touted by its advocates as being technologies which can help limiting the impact of digital technologies on the environment. And in a certain extent, this is true. 5G devices are more friendly for the environment, less harmful than 4G devices. For a byte of data transferred, 5G devices use 10 times less electricity than their 4G counterparts. So there is a strong argument which is being made here. What the advocates of the 5G don't tell you is that for every new technology that is being developed, there are new consumption habits that are being developed, which you call typically in economics the rebound effect. The rebound effect has been studied since the middle of the 19th century by Stanley Jevons, an economist, which says that on the one hand, a technology can be better for the environment, but the economy, the savings of electricity, energy, resources that is being made possible by this technology is counterbalanced by new ways of consuming, which actually explode. And if you make the balance between both, well, that's not sure. You actually can say at the end of the day that 5G technologies and devices will make the environment better. Why? Well, because 5G technologies will make cloud gaming even more possible. They will make metaverse even more possible. Let's assume that metaverse will come to reality one day. They will make NFTs more possible, and they will help develop cryptocurrencies. So what you get on the one hand, you lose it on the other hand, because you have new ways of using these technologies, and the future is obviously all about that. And if you ask me my own opinion, which is very empiric, I'm very doubtful that 5G devices will help protect the environment in the future. I really believe the contrary. This debate over the environmental impact of digital technologies is not really addressed. Why is that? Well, it's because 5G is about geopolitics. It's about scientific sovereignty. 5G devices today are being developed by the Chinese, but also by the Americans and also by the Europeans. But when you are European, you don't want to be dependent upon Chinese technologies for your strategic infrastructure. And for this reason, the Europeans are developing their own 5G devices, accelerating in this direction just to catch up delays with the Chinese. Nobody really knows in Europe what we'll do out of these 5G technologies. It's too early to tell precisely. What we just know is that we don't want to be bypassed by the Chinese. And this has become such a geopolitical debate. This has become such a geostrategic debate where our scientific sovereignty is at stake, that the question of ecology is just not being addressed. And this is why we are here touching upon a debate which is not very much addressed in the United States, not very much addressed in Europe. And this is why it's good to meet together to speak about it. And once again, thank you very much for having invited me to speak to this webinar.
Yeah, well, it's a most interesting recording, I would say. And it gives quite a big concern, especially when we consider that the cell phones are connected with many other devices that will increase the e-proof footprint. And the mining of minerals is a very important issue as well. This large technology system entails million more small cells, tens of thousands satellites, dishes, base stations, as well as sensors in the ocean. As he says, that the impact of 5G in the end will have environmental degradation when I hear this. So much very concerning. All the reason I would say to vote for a change on the way we develop these things, especially where we have the international politics related to it. I think we are now up for a panel discussion, and we can. Julian has a question.
No, I was just going to make a comment, if that's appropriate.
Yes.
But I think Guillaume and others have pointed out how really complex the situation is. One can look at it many different ways, scientifically, technologically, and so forth. Lawyers, Christian and I and Lorna and others on this panel do have a way of reconciling complexity while recognizing that we're not scientists and we're not technologists. And that has to do with process. Lawyers spend a lot of time being concerned about process. And the reason this is very relevant here, and it really is a value, as I mentioned, is that all of this is being launched and imposed upon us without proper assessing from a systems point of view, profound risks to the public, to the environment, and so forth. This concept of careful risk assessment is intrinsic to our legal system in the United States, in Europe, really around the world. And if you take the exploration, exploitation of space, the core of the citizens petition that we filed with the FCC is this very point. This is so complex, a single person, a single group cannot be experts on it. But we do have a sensible, wise way of approaching this. And it is not to just sort of helter-skelter, free-for-all in space that anybody can grab and take whatever they want. No, that there are traditions, there are principles. And one of them is before we leap, let's understand, let's use precaution, let's inform ourselves, and let's inform the public. So I think that this is really at the core of addressing, it has the modesty and humility that we don't know everything. There may be benefits from these technologies, but why are we just allowing corporate agendas and the military and the government to sort of usurp common sense and wisdom? And so the vote that we are asking people to take is as much a vote on process, that there are principles of consultation, of review, of integrating science with technology, with public opinion, with ethics, with law, that are actually well established and work well. Why is all of this being discarded for the benefit of the wireless industry?
This is a very good question, Julian. Do you have a response to this, Christian?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry. I agree that this is incredibly important, and that I think there is a need for public knowledge and interest and information and action on this issue, because at least I can only speak to Denmark. In Denmark, there is a decided lack of will to recognize these problems from the point of the administrative branch of the state. And in my experience, also in dealing with court cases of a public nature, the attendance and the attention of the press and of the public plays a role. I do think that many trial lawyers, I think, actually would agree to this point, although I don't know. But I think a lot of us do have that sense, if not decided proof, that public awareness of these issues can influence results, and is necessary for that reason also, I feel, to have public awareness on these issues, because it is a discussion for an entirely different webinar, I think. But there is an entirely separate issue in my view of how much of the government branches are actually uncorrupted or uninfluenced by irrelevant considerations, as opposed to plainly legal questions. That will, of course, vary from country to country, but on the other hand, maybe it won't. But I do feel very apprehensive about simply saying, well, if we take this to the courts, everything will work out fine, because we live in a fairy tale in which the rule of law is absolute. In my experience in dealing with torture cases, for instance, that is not so. And there's no reason why this would be different in the case of RFEMF, since it is in some sense, you can view this in many ways. You can view this as a conflict between different interests, some which are financially powerful, and on the other hand, the power of the public awareness and knowledge. as it is also likely to influence politicians as well as administrative and so forth branches of the state. I think that plays an unfortunate and irrelevant and pertinent role. For that reason also, I think the ECI is extremely important in order to force these issues. In my impression, the European institutions, EU institutions specifically, sorry, as well as local Danish administrative bodies can largely ignore these issues because not enough people are aware, and not enough people who are aware actually act on it. So that is my pessimistic view of current affairs.
We may also introduce another topic in the debate, since there is a lot of scientific knowledge on harm to humans as well as nature, as you just explained, Klaus. But also with your background in politics, can you give us some view on why all this knowledge so easily is ignored?
Good question.
Sorry, that's very easy to explain. There's a lot of lobbying going on from the industry to the members of the parliament. I think it is as simple as that. And the industry has developed very good arguments, especially the argument that people want this technology. The people are not aware of the alternatives. So industry simply says, people want it, so you are elected, you have to do what people want. I think it is as simple as that.
But then again, how can it be that it is so difficult in law cases to bring the scientific issues on the table?
Well, we have tried it. At least our German courts say their business is to look whether the laws are violated or not. They are not appointed for checking the laws. And I was told very directly, if we want to change the situation, we have to convince the public to put pressure on the politicians for the next election to make a statement in favor of some improvement here. So I think from the pure legal point of view, we have very little chances. We have to make public pressure, and that's why I think this webinar now is very useful. At least it informs a lot of people of what's going on, and that's how we have to proceed. Sorry, about the pure legal way in Germany, I can't see any possibility.
Julian wanted to respond.
Yeah, just a few very brief points. One is I do feel, to come back to the issue of values, as Klaus said, the value that the vast number of people want cell phones, want the technology, is an important value that, you know, who are we to sort of say that people don't know what they want? However, there is a response to that, and that is, do the people want just pure cell phones, or do they want safe cell phones? Do they want, it's the issue of safety, they want all these other things. And so what we're suggesting is there's a pathway toward balance. There's a way, in many ways, to have the benefits of some of these technologies, but to do it through processes and innovation that gives us far safer technologies and products, which is what the Congress in the United States and other agencies in Europe have recognized. So we're not pitting, we're not technology Luddites. We are advocates for a balanced, wise approach to to technology. So that's the way, I think, one useful way to address what Klaus is saying. In regard to law, the art of negotiation in the context of law is to find points of leverage. I don't agree with, now, the European system in some ways, as Christian points out, has some really powerful treaties and laws. The Lorna is testing the proposition of the extent of judicial review. So I can't speak for Germany, but the art, as I say, of law, negotiation, and advocacy is to find the points of leverage. In the cases that we are bringing, I give you two examples of very powerful leverage points, which, if recognized and we win, will have huge positive cascading effects. The first example is our litigation involving Lake Tahoe, which Mark Twain and others have recognized as a true national and international treasure. We are arguing that the local authorities, Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, has a fiduciary obligation under the statute that set it up to be concerned. They actually have a clear obligation to do environmental impact analysis, which they have not done. And so that is, you could say, that's a legal basis, a legal handle, but now something has happened. We have discovered, completely by synchronicity, that they are dumping, the only way they can justify this legally is to have towers that are fake, that are made out of plastics. And we have discovered there is huge amounts of microplastics that they're dumping into Lake Tahoe. And these microplastics contain lead and other carcinogenic substances. Just happens now, there is right clear on the books at the federal level, the Clean Water Act, California law, zero discharge. You are not allowed to put toxic carcinogens into the drinking water and food supply. So that is a legal handle, and we are right before a judge who seems to be really fair-minded. That single recognition could doom monopine towers in the United States, which will really check the onslaught of these blanket licenses for macro and small cell facilities. That's one example. Very quick other example, we are about to test the proposition whether the federal government has a legal right to lie. Now you can say, and deceive the public. If you go to the FDA website, you will see a young lady with a cell phone right next to her ear. And the FDA is saying, that's perfectly fine. There's no evidence that that is unsafe. Now there's ample evidence that it's unsafe. And so the proposition, which is very clearly and leanly stated, is, does the federal government have a right to misrepresent the facts to the public? And we believe, and we're going to say that proposition is strongly supported in law. They don't have such a right. They can talk about the uncertainty of it, but they cannot be promoting a principle which the medical community, largely in the United States, is relying upon. And virtually every local government, city council, county board of supervisors, is citing as the reference point to allow the proliferation of these towers. So to conclude, yes, in a blanket sense, I agree with Klaus, we're dealing with a massive juggernaut of huge industrial, commercial, financial power. However, the law is on our side in many ways. And if we can artfully find these acupuncture points, we will be able to see beneficial change, and each victory, each hill that's taken will support the taking of the next.
Christian, you wanted to say something as well, I think.
Oh yes, I just wanted to add that there is a way for the law also to work together with the public, and that is in the awareness arena, which is court cases can provide awareness and can support public initiatives of other sorts, of course, because it does provide a vantage point for people to address, well, this issue is being taken up, it is being addressed, so it is not it is not to me fruitless or irrelevant to attempt to have the law applied. I'm simply apprehensive and I do have some reservations about the way the judiciary works. Also, as Julian says, he has a fair-minded judge in the particular case. Yes, that's great. When we have fair-minded judges, maybe they will come up with a relevant ruling which do not represent either interest, but simply represents the law. And I am apprehensive about expecting this, but it does occur, of course. But I would just say that legal positivism, as it relates to saying, well, this is the law, then it must be so. That is not the reality, unfortunately. It does require something else. And that's what I wanted to say. Yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
When I look at some of the questions, they are also about the level of the legal system at which these arguments actually will be useful to be used. Because if you ask it at the municipality level, then normally not very much happens, because they're supposed not to look at safety and health at all. It's supposed to be all within the guidelines, so no problem. So at what level can you address these matters?
You can address them at the municipal level, as well as the central authority level, as well as in the courts. The question is of enforcement, in my view, not of application. The laws of, for instance, the conservation of wild birds, the preservation of habitats, etc., do apply when municipalities, for instance, make decisions about allowing or disallowing the erection of a mast. The question is also whether these whether this is sorry, I'm picking up.
Yeah, I've got the same. So maybe we have to put our microphones off when we don't speak.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah,
but
I'm so sorry.
Rules do apply in these cases, and it is correct that often for instance, a municipality will say, well, the question of health is something which we refer to the Ministry of Health. This is not our domain. We listen to the Ministry of Health because we have no other authority or capability to assess these issues. Okay, but you can still point out, well, these issues were not investigated, for instance, in relation to animals and the environment. You can still point that out. That is a legal point which is relevant for the municipal legal process. And you can complain if the municipality will not investigate it. You can take it to the courts. You can take it to the ombudsman. The rules do apply from top to bottom. But the rules are applicable from top to bottom. In my mind, it is a question of enforcement. Oh, I was asked. Sorry, I was asked if the what can you do in the UK if the ECI cannot be signed by UK citizens no longer, which is unfortunate. But the ECHR rules, the European Convention rules, apply to the UK as well. The UK is still a party to the European Convention of Human Rights, at least last time I checked. Lorna, I'm sure. Yeah, Lorna, you were not. Okay, yeah, sure. So far, so good. But the ECHR rules, which we went through, are still applicable directly. And as far as I know, still enter directly international law in the UK. So can be directly applied. As regards the EU directives, I don't know. Lorna, you would be the one to answer this. They are no longer applicable.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the issue. As you rightly said, yes, we are still despite having left the EU and the ECI not being anything applicable in the UK, what I would say to people in the UK in respect of the ECI is that if you know anybody or you have friends or relatives in Ireland or wider in any of the other member states, then please do forward it to them using Julian Gress's very helpful power of 10. And if you know 10 people who live in Europe, I mean, we are interconnected. Most of us will have friends and relatives in Ireland and in other European countries, and that is the way to contribute to this initiative.
Could I quickly ask a question?
As you wish, Ola.
Okay, I very much like what Julian and Christian and Klaus and Lorna said about the legal aspects, but with the shockingly big reductions of pollinators, my question is there really enough time to wait for human courts of law at any level to react and to do something? We are talking in the countries that have reported reductions, more than 90% reduction of pollinators. The time is quickly running out, I would say. Here in Sweden, it's just sort of completely empty, you know.
Is there anyone who has a view on this?
Well, I just offer this thought that we generally think of national security as involving military security. So years ago, I became very involved with national economic security. What you're referring to is, it could be seen as food security, environmental security. These are not yet recognized of overriding critical and immediate importance. However, in law, we do have legal instruments that don't require, if one could prevail, waiting for years for agencies upon remand to kind of figure things out. It's called an injunction. And that question is whether, the interesting thing about this whole area is the jurisprudence is international. We, in the United States courts and agencies, look to and can cite the breakthroughs that Lorna hopefully will achieve in England. There's a common set of problems here, a common set of law. I don't know whether in Denmark or Sweden, you can go into court and get an injunction based on an argument of national security interest being jeopardized by a set of activities that is not based on any kind of rational inquiry of risk assessment. That's a technical legal question, but it's conceivable you'd have a remedy immediately that wouldn't take, as you say, years and would be responsive to the imminent hazard that you're pointing out.
They're just kind of an intermezzo. People from the UK are trying to sign, but as Lorna just said, people from the UK cannot sign because they're not part of the European Union, but they can ask their friends who are citizens of the EU to sign instead of them. Any response to what Julia is just saying, Lorna?
I just wanted to pick up on, I think somebody asked a question about this to do with the applicability of other successes in different nations. So while it might not be directly applicable, certainly in the UK, we can put successes and other cases from other jurisdictions in front of the court and say, well, look, you know, this is a global issue. So while we have different jurisdictions, the fundamental point is that this is the movement now, I feel, is shining a light on the inadequacies of the state to look at the reality of the science. We're not asking people in bringing these types of claims to look at disputed scientific evidence. It's about saying to a government, look, this is what you are supposed to be doing. This is your obligation as a state to look at and to survey risks and to inform the public where there are risks, or tell us why there aren't any risks. And so in terms of other successes that have been around the world with the CDS, the FCC case, and also in Italy, yes, we can present those to the court, and they can have due regard to them. Of course, you know, very likely that there's going to be some uproar from the other side, but that's not to say that it shouldn't form part of an argument.
Can I please comment on the people that is in the UK or other countries where you cannot sign?
Pernille.
Thank you. We have a lot of good material on our web page, as I showed you in my presentation. So please use whatever you can use from there. The press releases, we actually ask people to translate into their own language and send it to their own local politicians, to their national politicians as well. So we have a lot of good material. We have a lot of good connections with organizations within the EU, and we actually try to keep up with all the legal actions that is going on around the world. So please use our webpage for all the material we have, and connect to us and ask us for help if we can do that.
Could I just quickly ask you another question, coming back to what Lorna and others said? And I'm sorry I'm so stupid, you know, but I sit here in my little corner of the world. From a legal point of view, I never see any reaction or action here in Sweden. There are no cell phone towers being brought down, or exposures being cut off, or cell phones being collected and discarded. Where is the action? Could you point out one or two major wins in courts of law that have changed human behavior towards all the other 8.7 million species?
Oh, this is quite a question, Ola. Does
I mean, I know it's quite.
You have a response to this one, because my own appreciation that there no single cell tower has went down at any point of the earth, but
no,
maybe I'm wrong.
If they did go down or were moved, it didn't have any impact at all on the exposure levels. So, and here in Sweden, I mean, I've been out several times today, for instance. Everyone is on their cell phones, smartphones, laptops, etc. And when you talk to people, they just want to have more, better, faster, more, better, faster. And I would say in Sweden, it's at least 99.5% or even more of the consumers/citizens who wants to have it, and have it big time and bigger. And they don't care about any Chinese miners or anything like that. They just are consumers. And how do we wake them up? I'm trying, you know, every day, but no.
Lorna, do you have a response to this one?
Yeah, well, certainly this is, as Julian describes it, this is a juggernaut, but also, I mean, we talk about municipalities and local authorities and central government and the different sort of obligations and the different powers that they have. Here in the UK, there have been some incredible successes locally on a local level to stop masts going up. And there are some amazing campaigners who do incredible work day in, day out, tirelessly, making sure that masts don't go up opposite hospitals, schools, nurseries, that kind of thing. Of course, you know, people are empowered to do things at their own local level, and we can all only do what we can do. I've often given the example is that the case that I'm involved in is sort of trying to stop the flood at the top, whereas you know, later on we're sort of mopping up at the end. We need to be able to stop all of the leaks before we have a flood further down the river. But similarly, it can be dispiriting feeling that that people are just totally addicted to technology. If we look back to about sort of 15, 16 years ago, before the first smartphone, people weren't completely addicted. as they are now. People weren't walking along the street banging into each other looking at their cell phones. I think I recently read Mark Arazi's book, PhoneGate, and he talks, I don't know if anybody has read this, but he talks about how he spent a long time trying to get the message out about the specific absorption rates of mobile phones when they were held very close to or proximate to skin. And people, weren't interested, or when a journalist was interested, all of a sudden they were sort of overruled. But it is about persistence. It's about perseverance. It's about knowing that what you are doing is the right thing. And again, yes, it's not a very inviting dinner party conversation, is it? Oh, guess what? You know what? I was doing this case, and I went to take a witness statement. You wouldn't believe it, but now, can you just turn your Wi-Fi off? It's making me feel really bad. It's not a great conversation to have, but it's necessary. And I just think that with enough perseverance and people all never forgetting that the main goal is safer technology for everybody and a safer future. And I take entirely what Ole says about pollination. And that is a case that needs to be brought. But again, everybody here can do something. Everybody is empowered as a global citizen to make a choice to try and spread the word. And people can only hear that if their ears are open.
Yeah, Lorna, I love what you say. And I always have that dinner conversation because no one knows who I am. So wherever I go, I always lean forward and start talking to people, anyone, in the underground or bus or tram or wherever, and just sort of informing them by asking them silly questions like, do you know that the World Health Organization in Geneva in Switzerland has cancer classified the radiation that comes from your cell phone? That kind of stupid comments. And people look up and say, what? What are you talking about? And then I get them to use their Google on the smartphone, finding the actual paperwork and realizing that, wow, no one has told me about this, But to come back to what you said about successful groups stopping the buildup of cell phone masts, that happens everywhere around the world. And I get reports, and as soon as I can, or if it's possible, I call someone and ask them, outside this hospital, do you mean you cannot use your cell phone? Of course I can. They never argue against the exposure. It's just a metal framework called the cell phone mast. And they don't see or realize the exposure being the problem. I mean, the cell tower they could keep and hang laundry in, it's the exposures we are talking about. And they are always, always there because every country has signed documents for public coverage, like here in Sweden. Everyone should always be covered with cell phone services.
So, Rob?
Julian?
If I may, there are two other practical points of leverage. We at BBU are now assessing the practical viability of the innovations coming out of Australia that will allow communities systematically, continuously to measure RF, EMF radiation emissions to create a map over time of their continual effects, cumulative effects, aggregate effects. What really excites me about this particular company is their core value of democratizing safety. They have a model that will allow a school, for example, to install their devices, their sensors within classrooms, proximate to the sources, and over a school year, almost minute by minute, second by second, they could detect the levels of radiation that these children and teachers are being exposed to. It's a leasing model. as they get more and more experience, the cost could come down, so it could be affordable by large numbers of organizations, communities, and so forth. And I think, as others have pointed out, the failure to enforce the standards, as pathetic as they are, is a huge cudgel. But if the people can actually show accurately the levels of radiation continuously on a map, it seems to me that will have a huge beneficial effect. The second is the concept of competing on safety that we're seeing in our satellite case right now, that a major satellite company is actually citing our pleadings, namely that the National Environmental Policy Act applies, cannot be categorically exempted for the entire space experiment. We are right now in the DC Court of Appeals with the Viasat under a collaborative agreement to challenge the FCC's blanket licenses, particularly to SpaceX, for what it's doing. So we should not assume that all these companies, all these government agencies, everybody is monolithic in the juggernaut. No, there are probably large numbers of people who are dismayed as what's happening. And in this case, they're actually citing the precedents that we have established. So this is another cause, I think, for significant hope. Through, if we can build alliances as part of this focused appeal through signatures, we will find many new resources and ways to position what we're doing in a way that will cause decision makers in the European Parliament, in this case, or Commission, to shift their views.
It is interesting what one of the people on the chat is telling, that we, in response actually also to all of what Ole is saying and Julian, that we need to use all kinds of interpersonal communications at local levels, and including music and poetry and theater to get the message across. And my personal experience, by the way, is that when you ask people if they feel there is something wrong with the radiation issue, then quite often people think, well, I'm not convinced that it really is healthy. So it's not as bad, in my experience at least, as what Ole is saying. A lot of people are not really sure that it is all right. So there is a basis on which you can build. And actually, when we had people here on the door to repair our internet connection, a few of them even signed just by asking them to do so. So some people are easy to be convinced. So and some people may need some music and poetry as well.
The semiconductor company that I mentioned today has a huge opportunity, since they're saying that worker safety is their preeminent mission and goal, to innovate and come up with an opportunity to create a chip, that perhaps a Li-Fi based chip. They would then take huge market share from many other companies in the industry. And so this doesn't have to be the appeal doesn't have to be only it's dangerous. The appeal can be on, you can have a competitive advantage by recognizing what we're saying and innovating and competing on safety.
Klaus fully agrees with you that we are not going to say that you should not, but we have to have a better technology than we currently have. I fully agree with you.
Could I ask another question?
Yes,
it just popped up in my head, and I'm sorry to be so Swedishly brutal and rude. How many of you have canceled your cell phones and what the licenses and all other wireless gadgets that you used to use?
To be honest, Ola, we threw all our equipment out of the door when we discovered that my wife was sensitive to the radiation.
Okay.
And when I retired, it was possible to finish the wireless smartphone. But to be honest, I recently bought a GSM, a very simple Nokia, because the internet didn't work anymore, and I couldn't even inform the operator that something was wrong.
Okay.
But that's only for emergency purposes.
And of course, I take it for granted that no one, and especially not Pernille, ever call a cell phone number. Because if you do, then the entire worldwide infrastructure must be up and running, because the infrastructure doesn't know if the cell phone is in Denmark, South America, or Japan. So it will look for it everywhere.
Pernille, I think you wanted to say something.
Yes,
No,
I will.
you can answer that, but just take that message. It's like childhood pornography. You cannot watch one single frame if you protest against it. It's the same here. You can never, ever call any form of cell phone number, because then your credibility goes out of the window.
Can I answer your first question, Ole?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
sorry.
Because you asked if anyone here has a cell phone or anything wireless, and you know that as I have EHS myself, EHS people are very keen on keeping everything that is wireless away from them. If I can answer the second question, I agree that we should not use or phone any smartphones or wireless devices, but that would actually be then a little bit impossible to connect to the world and talk to the world. So I'm not there yet, but I agree a long way with your argument.
Well, as I said, I'm not a British gentleman. I'm sorry for that.
But Lorna wants to respond.
That's okay. When I developed my injury, there was no choice. I had to make my office completely wired. So I have nothing in my office at all which is wireless. But that doesn't stop the fact that there are at least 2 masts near my office. I have film up on my wall and my windows in my office, but it's not perfect at all. In terms of my house, everything is wired. We have one router which you can press a button on to create a wireless, a small sort of wireless area, but nothing else at all. And we have nothing on overnight, so very low RFR at my house in the evenings. In terms of my mobile phone, I do still have one, but I try and keep it on airplane mode most of the time. I don't really use it very often. But I would love a situation where I just had a Nokia 6210 and everything else was just wired, but it's not practical right now. But again, it's necessity, actually. That means that I would necessity in terms of wanting to get rid of it all, but also necessity that I still need to be contactable when I'm, not in my office or at home.
Christian?
As Lona says, there is well, between the lines at least, there is an infrastructure surrounding us which necessitates calling cell phone numbers, for instance, something which we are not individually able to ignore depending on our profession. But it is definitely worth it to address what do we do ourselves. What I do personally is not optimal. What I do is I put the devices in a separate room away from me when I don't have to use them. That's what I do. So I'm not a good example, I think, in that respect. You've previously, Ole, you asked what effects were there of significance in relation to legal victories, for instance. I think it's a good question to ask someone from Italy, because Italy is the front runner on the legal issue still, I think. Maybe others know more, but in my impression is that the Supreme Administrative Court judgment from 2012 in Italy recognizing RFEMS as a work-related injury based on burden of proof rules, by the way, was continued in further lower court judgments over the preceding year, over the following years, including investigations done by independent court appointed specialists. So that would definitely be relevant to see what effect did those Italian judgments have on the Italian what is the word, on Italy. Let's just say, I forgot the word, but I think we should ask someone from Italy that question. Actually, they also had a judgment which that you had to inform the public about the dangers of cell phone radiation, for instance. It would be interesting to know what were the effects, if any.
Well, I could quickly tell you, Chris, that's a very good comment. In 2019, and I think it was in November, I was invited by the Italian Parliament in Rome. And then I also did some traveling around Italy to meet electro-hypersensitive people and their relatives. And the information campaign from, I think it was some kind of Supreme Court that forced the Parliament government authorities to inform the Italians. And people were really very well informed, I must say. In Sweden, if you ask people, they don't know anything on the street, you know. But in Italy, they really knew a lot. But that hadn't changed their behavior. They were just as anyone else, addicted up to their ears with cell phones, smartphones, laptops, tablets, blah, 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 of wireless nature. But they were informed.
It's a long struggle, but I definitely think that there are a lot of political, activist, legal, scientific avenues left untested and unpursued. And it's a matter of, I think, still just never giving up and proceeding as much as we can with the resources available to us, and trying to go further and further. Because I do think optimistically that it is a matter of time before this tide turns. But maybe that's
I agree. Yeah, I agree, Christian. And therefore, tomorrow I will go out early in the morning and continue pestering people in the Stockholm subway, you know. And so, yeah, right. And I will also seek for an asylum in Denmark, because you have Christian, Pernille, and so many others. And I think you are doing such a fantastic job. And also you have beautiful gardens.
Which is a major issue, of course.
It is, it is.
I see, by the way, that it is 40 minutes past 9 in Europe, at least. People are at other sides of the world have another time scheme, but we are busy now already for more than 2.5 hours. So I think it is time to wrap up, unless someone of the panel has something to say which really needs to be addressed before we finish. Yeah, Pernille?
If we are finishing off this wonderful webinar, I would very much like to say on behalf of the whole ECI team, thank you very much for the speakers. It has been a privilege to hear you. It has been so good to hear all the good support, all the good arguments. I'm very happy. And I know that the whole ECI team are too. And I would very much like to thank all the listeners as well. So it has been really great to join all of you. And thank you to the old name, Safe Tech International, Kate Keel, and your team for arranging this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pernille. I think this is a very good closing message. It was a pleasure to talk with you and hear what you're saying, and the possibilities that were presented by the speakers of how we could proceed, and the support we get by asking people to sign themselves, and to ask, what did you say, Julian, at least 10 people to sign as well, and to multiply in that way the number of people that sign the ECI. I think this is the most valuable webinar, and I would like to close with these words. Thank you very much.